Hey everybody, it's Darin Francis with Signals in Higher Education, also the CEO of Harbinger Lane Consulting. With me today is Benny Boas from Upright Education. Benny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Darin.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm excited to have you on this. We're obviously doing this as a part of a series on experiential learning, or I've been calling it career connected learning lately to try and be more encompassing. Um, but but yeah, I want to just understand a little bit more about just where you brought this concept of upright education into the market. So I understand that this is about aligning adult learning with workforce readiness, but just tell me a little bit more about sort of the top line of the product, what you're offering today, and then let's get into a little more of your around the origin story as well.
So Upright Education really works as an outsource or like an extension of a workforce development department or continuing education department for colleges and universities. What that means is that we provide go-to-market, market-ready programs across in-demand, upskilling and reskilling and workforce-centered roles. And then we provide all the curriculum and the training, as well as the admissions and administrative support that goes along with supporting these programs. So what that means is our relationships to the college essentially are structured in a way that allows schools, institutions, specifically like large universities and community colleges, to go to market really quickly with very high demand workforce programs. Currently, our programs are servicing the digital skills sector of workforce training. So we focus primarily on AI, data, and cybersecurity. Our focus specifically on digital skills started at a time where there was momentum and energy towards upskilling and reskilling into knowledge economy roles that really focused on strong technical barriers to entry. What we noticed was that colleges and universities had a hard time spinning up highly technical programs in a quick enough time to meet market needs. And so what that left was an opportunity for Upright to quickly insert ourselves as a provider of these programs, acting on behalf of these colleges to get AI, cyber, and data programs to market quickly, while also allowing schools to benefit in the revenue and the outcomes of the programs, as insofar as student completion, job placement, and tuition dollars.
Got it. Got it. What compelled you into this market?
There's a lot of reasons why someone would want to get into upskilling and reskilling today. And those reasons might have looked very different 5 years ago. So now we're facing an incredible labor market crunch. We see headlines of mass layoffs from pretty much every big name company, from Target to Walmart to Amazon, well, really Target, Amazon. 5 years ago, the labor market need looked much different. 5 years ago, there were simply not enough people that were being trained into digital roles to fill the employer demand. This was at a time where COVID hiring boom was just starting to explode. We had lots of new roles opening up across companies that were trying to transform into digital industry or digital businesses. A great example of that, again, is a company like Walmart, who's really taken a retail store into a large online distributor over the last 10 years. People had money to spend. People were spending that money online. Online businesses were growing. Digital products were in higher demand. There was a little bit of extra income that was a little more disposable at the time. And simply put, there was more investment in venture dollars and private markets into businesses. Now, that was the market of 5 years ago. When we started Upright, the purpose was really to help colleges really get access quickly to this explosion in hiring, to help them be a part of the wave, to ride the journey of people entering into new roles from what might have been untraditional backgrounds. Prior to Upright, I founded one of the first coding boot camps in the U.S., started in the Northeast in a small city called Burlington in the state of Vermont. The boot camp market really taught me very quickly that there is an opportunity to really do good by providing accessible market-ready training. The outcomes were really there. We were graduating, 80, 90% plus of our learners in any given quarter, and then placing 80, 90% of them into jobs within, 3 to 6 months. Once that opportunity became pretty obvious to me that we could do training in a way that was fast and affordable and accessible, it became even more obvious to me that colleges were missing out on this opportunity. So starting Upright was really our first prerogative, our first real kind of beachhead was, let's take these really accessible, intensive, short-term training courses that I found large success in my coding bootcamp and get colleges access to these markets. Well, we weren't the first to do that, actually. Coding bootcamp's another really reskilling, or what you'd call like targeted reskilling, fast track accelerated training programs in colleges and universities really started with a larger company that we now know of as 2U. But before that, there's Trilogy Education, and Trilogy acted as sort of one of the first OPMs in the boot camp space, providing universities with soup to nuts on ramps into coding boot camps. They had explosive growth. We all know that story was quite impressive. The founder, Dan, brought the company from zero to over 100 million in revenue in just over 4 years, and then had quite an exit to 2U. At the time when I was starting Upright, that story was really starting to explode. The challenge that I saw with their model and what I wanted to improve upon was how to bring these type of partnerships and relationships to community colleges. Community colleges at the time were still seen as sort of transfer institutions or places to get 2-year degrees. Workforce was kind of taking a back seat. But when my first company, my coding bootcamp company, I saw firsthand that almost a quarter of our enrollments were coming from folks who either attended or dropped out of a community college. So there was enough data there to really support the idea that there are community college learners who are seeking fast targeted reskilling and job training. Our first partner in Upright really was a community college local to where I started my first company in Vermont. It was the Community College of Vermont. So I had a relationship with and still do have a great relationship with the director of workforce development there. And my pitch to him was, hey, let us try to provide you a Trilogy Education-esque service. And in return, you become our first partner at a company called Upright. And I'm sorry this is really in the early days. Well, here's the director of workforce there, Michael, was gung-ho about it. He was ecstatic. I think there was a lot of energy around the table on the administrative side as well. So generally, there was pretty broad support. Well, there's only one issue. The issue there is that Vermont isn't the largest state. Actually, it's either the smallest or the second smallest state in the union, or in the U.S. So I can't actually remember, but it's tiny. It's like 600 to 700,000 residents. And then the Community College of Vermont isn't that large either. I mean, it's large in comparison to Vermont. I think it's actually the second largest institution. But in comparison to other institutions in the U.S., specifically ones that companies like 2U or Trilogy had partnered with, we were batting in a relatively small field. So that poses a pretty big risk. Well, if we partner with CCV to do really these actually pretty expensive workforce training programs that require a certain amount of enrollment to make the unit economics really work for us, then they have to provide us back enough enrollment to actually make it work. And as we just discussed, they weren't necessarily the biggest fish in the pond. Our model at the time, which was very innovative and now is actually pretty broadly adopted, was to aggregate enrollment. So use more of like a federated enrollment model across many colleges of the same size and enroll these learners from that enrolled through each of these colleges into shared cohorts. You can think about this kind of like course share at the continuing education level.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Sounds a little bit like Rise or like Acadium or somebody like that.
Yeah, so exactly. So those models are different just in terms of their like go to market, their structure, et cetera. But yeah, course share is an explosive opportunity, I think, for schools generally. And I love what they're doing, particularly Rise. I think they're nailing the market really well, especially if you can think about how we bring down the cost of delivering education for schools. Our course share model was different because it was specifically on the continuing education side of the university. Rise is more in the undergraduate. What was unique about the way we structured our partnerships with universities and institutions also is that we looked at sort of where were the broadest categories of workforce needs, and could our universities share essentially the same opportunity in addressing those specific workforce areas. So like digital skills was a really great place for us to start, pretty much because there was also an explosion, if we all remember at the time, of working from home. So a lot of folks from all different backgrounds who maybe were stay-at-home moms, dads, single parents, etc., who wanted to really be able to benefit from a more lifestyle-friendly work environment, we're really thinking about switching into digital jobs. And that was happening all over the country, rural areas, primary, metros, secondary, tertiary metros. And so the combined sort of shared cohort model really started to work because that concept became pretty popular amongst even the learners who wanted to work remotely as well.
You're giving me a good picture of sort of your ICP, and you're really driving after a level of a certain profile of learner at a certain type of institution. I'm wondering, can you talk about like institutional fit, where I can imagine that every institution has its own sort of adoption cycle, its own way in which they're going to, engage with you. But what challenges did you face maybe in the early days engaging at institutions at different levels of like readiness, and then maybe how did you adjust that over time?
The university and college market is highly nuanced, and there is, even in schools that might resemble each other in terms of enrollment size, like FTEs, number of enrolled learners, or in terms of division, sports, etc. In some cases, if you don't look sort of if you don't read between the lines, you'll see that they're actually super distinct. Some of the distinction comes from many of the qualities that make up an institution. You have in-state population versus out-of-state population. You have metro range that the college belongs to versus, versus socioeconomic and demographic makeup of learners. So there's just such a range in terms of the type of institution that we could have partnered with. It made it really hard for us to know which would become successful partners at first. Our initial kind of theory was that we would work with schools that had a growing continuing education need and department in sort of like secondary and tertiary markets. So not necessarily in the primary metros where there's already some competitive movement coming in. And this was really geared towards impact as well, because we figured that there was also a lack of accessible opportunity in the markets that we were going after. So if we're partnering with a school in, let's call it like the Austin, Texas metro area, it's just going to have a different impact opportunity than if we're in, let's call it, I don't know, rural Vermont. They look like there's one is being actively served, whereas one still has a lot of greenfield opportunity. The ICP we initially tried to go after was where we saw the impact, which was really in the rural sort of tertiary markets. And for that reason, we were right about one thing, which was that those partnerships were really ready to take off. We signed a number of these partnerships really quickly, from schools in Western Massachusetts like Greenfield Community College or Springfield Technical Community College, to schools in rural New York like it's like SUNY Schenectady, or some other SUNY schools. We had schools in rural parts of Michigan and in Montana, and it was interesting because at the time we thought that if just by matter of aggregating enrollment, that eventually between these number of smaller schools, the enrollment between them would make a viable business and like would make up the unit economics to make this like a really strong operation. Well, that initial assumption turned out to not be true, and that was one of the biggest learning lessons we had about Upright, was that market really does matter in continuing education, and here's why. Unlike schools unlike undergraduate and graduate degree level education, you're not getting out of state applicants to come into continuing education generally for workforce programs in schools, unless you're a large university who has more of a national audience. But generally, a lot of the markets you're targeting are pretty local to the institution, and that still rings true for even some of the largest schools. I mean, discounting behemoths like Harvard or MIT, people with large digital program presence that sell a ton of programs. What workforce and continuing education really exists for is to upskill and reskill local populations. And so along continuing education and specific in workforce development, you'll also get programs sometimes in like the skilled trades and healthcare, et cetera. And the folks enrolling in those programs might even have to do like hands-on training during the program, like clinical work. And so again, like the local population really makes a difference in how you're enrolling and continuing ed. Okay, so that was kind of the first thing we learned, was that even though the aggregated enrollment was working, we still weren't getting enough between each school to make the investment into each school strong enough for us to continue some of these relationships. And so we actually had to part ways with some of these partners at first. Now, there were a lot of outliers. Like there's still schools who are in some geographies and markets that do exceptionally well, and they don't necessarily meet what you would imagine to be like the strict qualifications that I just described of being like a good market for these types of programs. Like they're not necessarily like huge metro ranges with booming like tech industries. Some of these schools that are still working very well actually have different qualities that also provide enrollment opportunities that sometimes people overlook. Some of these qualities might include like workforce funding. If there's the availability of workforce funding in areas like WIOA or through other state or federally funded programs, that tends to be a really great enrollment driver, again, because it really lowers the cost of tuition to a point where in some cases it's completely free. So again, funding makes up an opportunity for us in some more overlooked markets. Now, another area where we saw opportunity in terms of some of the markets we were serving was actually in socioeconomic makeup. We found in markets where where job growth was still trending up, and you're able to see the national poverty or the metropolitan poverty range sit below the national, as well as the income range sitting above the national average, you tend to see better enrollment as well into continuing education. And of course, that's an indicator of whether or not folks can afford it. What we didn't see as much of sort of like indicators of a good partner for us early on, or who are like our good ICPs were going to be, and what it still kind of remains to be proven to us, is the size of the continuing education department. it's actually, in my opinion, a very well masked, or it's either the best kept secret in higher ed or the biggest failure, because the many institutions do not know the size of their own continuing education department. They have a rough estimate, but I don't think that they truly know how many enrollments are coming into their branded programs or the university programs. And you might ask, okay, why is that? It's not necessarily because there's an issue in like an infrastructure issue and where students enroll, they're just not being counted. It's that many schools have many different partners. Just like Upright is a third-party provider for one school, there may be one school that has 4 or 5 Uprights, but they might be serving different needs, like maybe again in skilled trade, maybe again in healthcare. And a lot of the reporting here is either not being reported in aggregate, like they're not counting in aggregate the total size of enrollment between all departments or partners and then internally as well, or it's just not being reported properly. So the reporting side of what's happening in continuing education remains to be actually kind of a black hole that hasn't really been figured out. I think that it's a massive issue for colleges because you're not really going to be able to foresee some of the opportunities in front of you if you don't know what your enrollment actually looks like. And then you're also not going to know where your blind spots are. The last thing I'll say to that is a big problem with sort of the data side of this is that you're also kind of not capturing, let's put it this way, without an understanding of sort of like what is really happening in your market and with what programs are being successful and what aren't, you're not able to do a really good forensic analysis of like what you should or should not even be serving. And that's where I'm starting to find there to be like kind of an issue with how colleges are thinking about continuing education. I feel like there's a lot of conversation around building and applying workforce education programs specific to market need in very specific areas. That alone is a big can of worms that we can go into in and of itself. But when you actually think about what that means, it's a lot of investment that has to go into that. You have to talk to employers. You have to get to understand what their needs are. The problem is that schools don't have a lot of the resources on the continuing education side to even make that investment. So sometimes you don't get a lot of the sort of customization or the creativity that you need to address really local workforce challenges. But even more than that, people tend to take a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to offering programs in the sector. And so what you get is actually an oversaturation of the same programs, which become workforce not critical, and an lower supply of programs that are actually critical to workforce needs locally.
That makes sense. I want to talk a little bit about the program model a little further. But I guess I want to do it in this way. So this is how I think about it. So at Harbinger Lane, when we work with companies, we help you think through establishing kind of a co-readiness between the company and the institution you're going to serve. And we come up with an institutional maturity framework for how we think about an institution's ability to sort of, become a good partner and actually facilitate a strong partnership. And the end goal in our minds, and I think you would agree, is really it's co-creating or architecting an agreement together that makes the greatest impact on students. And so when I saw that not only do you work more like an OPM in so many regards, where you're sort of white glove service, you're kind of handling everything to make this happen, but you also really work with institutions and give them an active part in shaping the work that you do together. I thought that was really interesting. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about just how do institutions play a role in establishing what Upright looks like on their campus or as an offering through their continuing ed division.
The process of rolling out programs by partners is a collaborative one in such that we have a catalog that we work with internally that we've built and owned the IP for and created, etc., that we believe do the absolute best job of training an individual for the specific program they're signing up for. Okay. Now, that being the case, sometimes it doesn't matter how good the program is if the demand locally is not there. And so what we've done as an organization is we first started by building quite a few programs. So unlike other organizations that might start with like one program and offer them through 20 schools, we built like 16 programs. And what we did is we put together a catalog that we think addresses the widest net in terms of enrollment, but also the widest net in terms of critical need for employers. Within that catalog, we give schools the opportunity to go through each program to select which ones they think is going to perform best in their market and which ones they've heard from their employers are most needed for the workforce. And so what we do is instead of co-building programs together, which gets expensive and costly, and oftentimes actually doesn't even look that much different from the last one, we instead do an analysis of where each program fits into their competitive matrix, as well as where it fits into their local market. From that analysis, we're able to determine, okay, X program has, 4 other universities offering it. Even if there is a big enough market for it, it doesn't look like it's a critical need. Let's nix that and go to the next one. Then we end up identifying about 3 to 4 programs that we think really work. And we go forward with signing an agreement that brings those in the market. So rather than co-creating curriculum, what we do is we co-create a program catalog. And the program catalog becomes sort of the catalyst for the university to obviously like enter the market and get to selling and seeing how they perform, but B, it becomes sort of their test, their guinea pig. You got to understand, like, the way that people have a misconception about continuing education and workforce development division. I often get asked, okay, who's the instructors? Is it yours? Is it theirs? Like, what's their role? What's our role, etc. Before we get into all that, one of the misconceptions that people don't really seem to really know about continuing education is continuing education is a business unit. Okay, it's not an academic unit. And so what that means is that as a business unit, their goal is to find out what's in the most critical need and then offer those products. Okay, so that being the case, they're not in the business of building programs. They're actually, funny enough, not even in the business of instructing programs. And that is one thing that I found was really interesting when you dive into that side of the market, which is right now the fastest growing segment in higher education, growing by over 10% annually, whereas like you see degrees shrinking every year. The thing is that we have to really first come to understand is like it's a philosophical question. It's what is a university best at? Okay, and then what is a continuing education division best at? Because they operate very differently. And if a continuing education division is best at building, developing, and deploying programs, I would sure as hell hope they don't use Upright. They definitely their bread and butter and their sweet spot. Awesome. Well, that's not most colleges. That's a very small select few. Most colleges are to have a continuing education. Their continuing education division is the best at identifying needs. And so our job as a provider and a partner for these colleges is to fulfill those needs. And their job is to vet us for quality and make sure that we're doing it accurately and responsibly.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you're not pitching a one size fits all catalog. You're curating it based on what they believe they need, and in a way, as a partner to them, in a way that actually helps them get the maximum value from the service. That makes a lot of sense. Let's pivot a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what sets you apart for adult learners, for career changers. Like why is this being so successful at these institutions? I mean, is it really about that match that you just discussed, where the career ed folks go, ah, that's what I need, and they've identified it in your catalog and they work with you to sort of set it up, or do you feel like there's some other elements that are kind of key to your success at an institution?
I would say that the match is definitely where we start. I'd say that's more than half the battle in becoming successful. The other half is it's just like any other product. Iteration, iteration, iteration. We live in an education market that is changing faster than ever. We also live in a labor market that's changing faster than ever. Technologies are growing rapidly amongst educators. Technologies are also growing rapidly amongst employers. So things are changing really quickly. In 2025, the broader tech sector is experiencing contraction, whereas AI investment is seeing an absolute boom. The thing that we've realized about sort of two economic indicators pointing in opposite directions, right? On one hand, you have inflation that is hopefully stagnating or supposed to go down. And then on the other end, you have jobs, which you hope would then increase, but is actually not. Jobs are moving the opposite direction. You have to try to predict what fits the learner's schedule, what fits their budget, and what fits the market uniquely in a way that services the program the absolute best. And the learner, sorry. So the program fits the learner the absolute best. Okay. The challenge there is that there's been historic precedent set by the market, and how long programs are to be run for, and what types of modalities of learning are supposed to be employed to best serve those types of learners, and then how much those programs should cost. What's an obvious example of that? A degree. A degree is a very obvious example of, like, you go there for 4 years, you learn this stuff, you get a degree, boom, you're ready to go back into the job market. We all know that degrees are very important. We know that the average degree earner still makes over $1 million more in their lifetime than somebody who does not hold a degree. But we also know that the degrees are becoming that undergraduate degrees are generally also becoming quite over commodified. It's the same for the exact same thing happened to boot camps, right? You had an explosion of coding jobs. Tons of coding boot camps came to the market to service it. We totally oversaturated the field with programmers at the same time where programming was made a lot easier by AI. Okay, now you have another oversaturation problem. Then you have certificates. Okay, so those are almost like the three categories I like to think about things, is like degrees, boot camp, certificates. Certificates are supposed to be like shorter form, much more targeted, direct, cheaper, off the shelf, sometimes sync, sometimes async. But generally supposed to fall like, in a sub, $2,000 price range, and should lead to some type of industry like recognized credential, whatever. Okay. What's the problem with all these three things? Is that they're much too generally defined to be adaptive enough to a market that is spinning around the world like crazy. And so you have these narrow definitions of how people learn. And within those definitions, we've isolated groups of products that we sell and to learners to fit those needs through years of academia and pedagogical research, etc. And it's just, that's not how things are moving. Everything is an amorphous blob right now that requires some structure, but the structure needs to be figured out as you go. It cannot be predefined by what we consider products to be boxed up and sold as. It's a boot camp, it's a certificate, it's a degree. I don't think that's the nature. My maybe I'm alone in this island, but my opinion of this, that sort of productization is an over generalization of how people need to learn right now. And so what we do at Upright is we try to break that mold by breaking the barrier and blending the lines between what you'd consider a certificate or a boot camp. And what that means is, like, in a boot camp type setting, you would have like a certain amount of like synchronous hours. You might have some type of outcome. You have some type of career training, and then you put a bunch of products that would fit this specific length of time and this like placement focus, et cetera. And a certificate, it's much shorter, et cetera. We just go to whatever the product demands. Okay, you're learning AI, you're learning prompt engineering. All right, well, great, cool. How long should you learn that for? We need to figure that out. What's the cost of the program? We need to figure it out. And we do it agnostic of sort of how products have been defined in the past, to make sure that going forward, it's actually something that people will buy, and also something that employers actually need.
So, you're answering one question. Because Upright is offered through the Career Center, you're co-curricular. You're not part of the curriculum, so you're not defined by these constraints that you were just describing, right? I'm wondering too. I felt like this is what you're saying, but tell me if I'm right. As the job market and the potential for jobs shrinks, the best path to a job is to get precisely the right training for precisely the right job at precisely the right time. And you can't, because that's the case, you can't sacrifice on this window. You need to try and create the course or the program for whatever length it needs to be, based on whatever the ideal outcome has to be for that student. Is that kind of how you're saying it? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, but the thing that we have to clearly define is, like, what do we consider an outcome? I've been trying to understand that for so long in the last 2 years that it's making my head spin. Okay, outcomes are, I think, used to be a lot more clear cut. And I'm not talking about like success metrics, like learner success, like like program completion. I'm talking about outcome. What happens after? What's the outcome? I feel I also have opinions on what we would generally consider a win or successful outcome, because what we hear in the world of impact, and where some of even the regulations in terms of federal funding are going for items like Workforce Pell, or for institutional mandates around advertising and marketing, is that outcomes should have some tie back to placement. Placement is a nebulous concept, because placement could vary from type of employment, whether it's full-time, part-time. It could vary from incumbent employees and retention. It could be placing folks into new roles, or upskill, or placing them into a promotion in a current role. In general, like whether it's retention and promotion, new job, type of job, etc. The idea is that outcome is something that students want. And that's just not true. What we find constantly is that, and especially into enrollments now in 2025 and compared to where we used to be, is that a lot of our students are enrolling simply because they want to learn the skills that are keeping them engaged in the world we live in at the time we live in it. AI is moving so quickly, and the technologies are moving so fast, that there is almost a general education component to learning technology skills that's so table stakes that the outcome is learning for learning's sake. And then sometimes we forget to understand that is something that, like, people will pay for. And it's something that people want. And so when we tie like the program creation goals to very specific outcomes, And then you start talking about those outcomes on admissions calls when you're talking to learners. Some of them will say, hey, like, that's not even the reason I'm here and in this course. Some might say, of course I want, like, that's exactly what I want. I want to retain my current job, or I want to upskill or whatever, reskill. But it's one of many options. It's not the option. So what we try to produce for is just the absolute highest, the highest satisfaction amongst learners who go through the program, and amongst employers who send employees through the programs, meaning that we have some verification that the skills are working really well on the employer end, but we also make sure that we're meeting the needs of learners who are coming from their local markets.
No, that's really good. I'm curious, how do your, without throwing anybody under the bus, how do your institutional partners receive that message? I mean, do they feel like they have alignment with you on what the outcome ought to be, and like, or do they have different goals for, are they checking a box saying, hey, I need to have a certain amount of course options available to my students, and so long as they complete those courses, we're happy? Or are they completely driven to the, it's got to result in a job or some other metrics? I'm just curious, how are they judging sort of the effectiveness of, you know, their work with you?
So let me preface by also saying that on the last statement, a lot of what I said may be true, but we also do track job placement in those outcomes, and we do share those because we know that it's important to institutions, and especially now with federal funding being tied to that. So yes, we do have those conversations in regards to where students end up with regard to placement rates, et cetera. My opinion is just different than what than Upright's like output. And so with our institution partners, well, first of all, one thing is for sure, everyone knows this is a challenging employment market. That's just starting the bar there, which is that this is an extremely hard market for employment in the knowledge economy and in digital skills. We have to level set that. After that, we also definitely do track outcomes on from every metric, from placement, et cetera. Now, where it really gets interesting is, what does that mean in terms of funding next year? Upright is really at the beginning of what is going to be the largest federal funding shift in higher education in over 50 years. As you probably are already aware, in the Big Beautiful Bill, Congress passed legislation that approved Workforce Pell, which is essentially it's been a bipartisan effort for quite some time. I think over the last 3 administrations, we've looked at bills containing language and around Workforce Pell, which is the expansion of the Pell Grant into short-term non-credit programs. So able to cover things like HVAC technician training to programs at Upright like AI training. Now, the interesting component of Workforce Pell, that everything has a kicker. The kicker there is the outcomes. You need to meet the 70-70 rule. There are over 70% placement, over 70% completion. We do meet those metrics in terms of like how we've tracked outcomes and where we've been and where we've come to date. Now, the question is will we be able to sustain those metrics over the next 6 months? It's a challenge for sure. Just given where the job market's at, we have to be really careful about making sure that we are doing our best to support learners throughout every side of their journey, but then also provide them the critical support they need after the program to be able to land jobs, keep jobs, et cetera. What makes Upright different than every other provider is one concept that we held true to since day one, which is unlimited career support. We are one of the only providers I know in the market that offers unlimited career support for every graduate until they get a job. Okay, so you can continuously use our career services, continuously use our career coaching, continuously reuse our resources until you find or land your first job. And we're going to support you every step of the way, whether it's a month after you graduate, 2 days after you graduate, 2 years after you graduate. You can always come back, work with us, and we're going to make sure that you find what you need next.
That's awesome. But, you know, as you describe your offering and the diverse set of potential learners, adult learners, first gen learners, or just any student coming through career services for this, the upskilling case is pretty strong. Like, I mean, especially around AI, right? Like, I would imagine that you'd have. Do you see an uptick in people that are enrolling in effectively some of these courses around AI just to sort of upskill, refresh their skills, and get new knowledge to continue to do the job that they're already doing, but do it better with AI?
So it's an interesting question. So statistically, it's been a dramatic shift. We went from 75% of our enrollments being reskilling last year to now 75% of our enrollments being upskilling and only 25% in upskilling. So it's been a really dramatic shift towards upskilling. Even in roles like data, which if you think about our programs, all of them incorporate AI. 3 of them are really particularly grounded in AI, which is data, analytics, AI prompt engineering, then AI agent building. Those 3 have been flying off the shelf. And of course, again, the majority of our enrollments are not looking for careers. They're not looking for. They're not even looking for career coaching. We let learners opt in or opt out at the beginning of the course as to whether or not they're going to take career services. And it turns out that the majority currently are not, and especially those who are looking to AI upskill.
Wow, that's impressive. Listen, I want to be sensitive to your time. I think I would like to get your take, maybe just a story, a case study of a student that was impacted, something you're particularly proud of. Uh, a lot of times we look at statistics and we get impressive statistics, but I always find the most impressive are the human stories that we can tell. Can you think of an example of a student who was really impacted, that just was a story that just stuck out to you?
Of course, yeah, I'm happy to. So I'm going to leave the name blank for right now because we haven't signed any type of media disclosure waiver with the student. But let's call this person M. So M was an operations coordinator at like a regional logistics company, about 29 years old. She had really like zero technical like background, but she was working in a position that just had like a ton of repetitive tasks, and was just constantly worried about whether or not like administration would be like an administrative role would be something that would be phased out of her organization. When she met with our admissions team, one of the admissions reps asked specifically if there was a concern about whether or not there was like job safety in her role. And she nearly broke down crying. It was something that she'd spent so much of her month, her week, thinking about, especially given just the wave of layoffs that's happened thus far this year. And then she said her company started to explore the idea of AI. And that was where she started to feel really overwhelmed. I think she'd worked in some type of clerical or like some type of front of house job or some type of front desk job, and had been there for a lot of her, like, I think a lot of her working life. She's, in her late 20s. So I think she'd been there since graduating college. We asked if there was a specific area where she felt she could be more effective, that was critical to her feeling more secure in her role, or at least being able to demonstrate to her employer that they felt confident in her being additive over time rather than something that could be replaced by automation. And we realized that there was a lot of work that could be done around prompt engineering. And so a lot of what we found is that a lot of the employers who are sending our learners to our programs, over 90% of them have a subscription of some type to an LLM, like whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, et cetera. And we believe that they are over 80% of those employees are using all these tools, not ineffectively, but not as effectively as they could. Out of the survey of maybe 100 of our students have gone through these programs, 8 out of 10 almost consistently demonstrate almost zero knowledge of prompt engineering. Okay. And actually, personally, I took the prompt engineering course that we offered, and the first day I had more aha moments than I'd had in learning prompt engineering through any other channel. So I will vouch for this is an extremely informative and very, very eye-opening program. So the first thing we did was, again, student M learned how to design prompts that actually took automations into workflows and steps through her vendor processing. So this company specifically received tons of emails with inputs from fulfillments and shipment orders, et cetera, that were coming into the system that then had to be processed and sent out. She had to handle a lot of the communications between the shipping and the fulfillment departments, and then also had to do a lot of the vendor management. And so what she ended up doing was going through the course and building an automation agent through NAN, which is like an automation agent platform that extracted key messages from each of the emails that she was working with, put them in, summarize them using the company's tone, et cetera, flag them for risk, and then produce a ready to send customer update, which essentially took a lot of the work that she was doing an entire day and broke it down into an automation that could handle each request in minutes. So, what used to take 90 minutes a day was now taking her 7 minutes. And instead of her actually moving into feeling more concerned that this was automating away her job, the company that she was working for gave her a title increase to automation and operations coordinator. And she ended up working still to this day, is currently working in this company, and helping produce more automations around other areas of the business. Again, this is a 60-year-old freight company. So it's a different business and probably what we'd think of in terms of a regular student story, but ended up working with this company to do a lot more on the with the administration and on the admin side to automate other processes and procedures in her role. So generally she took what was an extremely challenging place in her career and where she felt like AI was going to take her job, and use our course to her advantage to not only solidify her role at the company, but also actually get a little bit of a title bump there as well.
That's a great story. And you just sold me. I need to go take the prompt engineering course because it sounds awesome. Benny, I really appreciate you taking the time. I think I understand much more clearly what you're doing at Upright. And I want to give you the last word. If there are higher ed leaders that are thinking about ways that they can better serve their adult population and maybe increase the effectiveness of their career support services, final thoughts from you on how they ought to be thinking about this moment in time in their world?
The last statement I can remark on that maybe we didn't cover, and something that I really want to address, is that there is a massive labor market crisis happening right now. And I think we're seeing really the early signs of it right at this moment. My advice to anyone who is working on the workforce development side is get to market really quickly with products that you think can have an impact immediately. Don't wait to see if the market will change or will evolve to be a large enough market to make you feel like it's worth building into. There's so much opportunity right now to create programs that are impactful across every single sector and industry, whether it's in business programs, marketing programs, et cetera. You can automate content production at a pace which we've never been able to before. So let's stop letting curriculum collect dust, and let's make sure that we're keeping our programs as cutting edge to what's happening today as we possibly can across every side of higher ed, from undergraduate degrees to graduate degrees to continuing education, because it's never been easier to produce really good content, and there's never been a bigger need for it.
Well said. I agree. This comes down to the best delivery mechanisms, the things that you can stand up the fastest with the limited support you have at your institution to getting it done. You need partners. You need an upright education. Um, Benny, thanks again for taking the time today. Really love the conversation and I look forward to your success this next year.
Thanks so much, Darin. Appreciate you having me, and have a great day.